Hi everybody, my name is Ridhi Sreenivas and today I'm here to help expand your knowledge on the world of anatomy and physiology. But before we get into all that really interesting stuff, we need to know the basics. I know a lot of people just tend to jump into a certain system and kind of just go from there. Or they start reading some research. But if you don't even understand the terms, what anatomy physiology even is, it's kind of no point in knowing because you don't know why you're just studying this and you don't understand it. What's the point of it? And that's what we're going to get into in this video, and also directional regional terms, so that when you learn about the systems, it'll be a breeze to get through all those terms. So let's get right into that. So first, think about the word anatomy, whether you've heard it in another area of study, or just heard on a video or something. Wherever you heard it, just think about that word, or if you never heard it at all, try to guess what that word could mean, and maybe in this area of study as well. What could that word mean? I'll press a second, think about that, or you can pause the video if you want to write down and maybe modify it when I talk about it a bit. But basically, okay, I don't know if that's visible. Anatomy. Is that visible to you guys? I think that's decently visible, hopefully. But basically, the word anatomy is refers to structures. It refers to the organization of different components within the body. For instance, the location of organs, if a test or something, or you hear from somewhere, or you're trying to figure out the location of a certain organ, you're looking at the anatomy of the body, right? And also, if you want to you know how certain organs have different parts to them, how the heart has the right atrium, how the heart has the left atrium, all those parts, all those different components within an organ, those specific components, that's also anatomy, because you're trying to label which one's which part. So that would be also the specific components and organs. I'm not going to write much though because it's going to take time. But basically, that's basically what that is. And there are two main sub areas that you can look into. So first we have gross anatomy. This may be a more familiar term, but it's basically if you were to look, it's the organ that you can see with your naked eye. I don't know if it's a nice way to say it, but something that you can just see visibly. If you ever seen on YouTube, they have those people, they the scientists or researchers, they'll show a real brain connected to the spinal cord, that's gross anatomy, because it's the organ you can visibly see, you can identify, that's the brain, but just seeing it, no tools, nothing. On the other hand, there's microscopic anatomy, which is more related to histology, which is the study of tissues. But microscopic anatomy, you need a microscope to see it and see the certain tissues that's in that organ, and specific cells, and the organization of all that. That's another type of anatomy, and I don't know if that's very commonly known, if you're at least getting firstly into anatomy and physiology. But now, let's get into my favorite part, guys. Physiology. It's so much fun to talk about when you understand those processes. I mean, at first it kind of comes off a little iffy, but it's really fun to talk about once you understand everything. So stay tuned for those videos. But anyways, we're gonna do the same process here. Think of the word physiology for a second. If you want to pause the video, take a minute to think about that. Feel free to until I get into that. So basically, the word physiology is, think of in general, refers to function. Physiology, function, starts with that sound. So if that's how you want to remember it, physiology equals function. But in this case, it's just how the different processes within the body, how certain organs interact together, how they produce a certain function together collectively. And there are many different types. There's so many different types. It just depends on the area of study that you're looking at. But some main ones, at least I'm going to talk about for more of my next few videos. One is cellular physiology. It's the physiology within cells, like what processes go on in a cell, like protein synthesis, like how from the rough ER, those proteins are kind of made, and then they go through the vesicles, and then the Golgi apparatus like modifies them and then carries them out to wherever they need to go. That whole like process right there, that's physiology. Or the sliding filament model, my favorite topic to talk about. You guys have to stay tuned for that video. So yeah, but the sliding filament model is also another great example of cellular physiology. Another is organ physiology. So organ physiology is like the physiology of organs, like what functions that organ specifically does. Like for instance, like how the heart pumps blood throughout the body. That's the function of the heart. So it's just like the specific functions that the organ does. But then there's also organ system physiology, which is like how all the different organs within that system collectively work together to carry out like a specific function. Like how I'm moving my arm like this, like multiple muscles are working together of the muscular system. Multiple of those muscles are working together to do this. Sorry guys, I just cut myself off because I was yapping too much, but I just want to make sure that you guys understand that collectively, anatomy and physiology is extremely important because it can be useful information for us when we're trying to understand how a disease works, which is known, this study is known as pathophysiology. Now, this Greek root, patho, this Greek root just means like anything relating to disease. Okay? And then physiology, you guys should know, is how something functions. So this study is basically just about, this area of study is just about like how diseases work, what processes, or like why they do what they do, or like how they get into doing what they do. That's basically the study. Okay, so anatomy and physiology could just be very useful for that because we can understand how to treat and prevent the diseases, because anatomy, first of all, tells us where the structures are, what structures could be involved, the organization levels of certain organs like the tissues. We can understand all of that, where they are located. And then physiology tells us how this like organ or whatever's going wrong, how this usually functions, so we can understand so we need to understand the normal, so we can understand how to bring the abnormal back to normal, so we can understand what's going wrong in the disease, what part in this process that normally happens is going wrong. Just my spiel on that. But let's get into levels of organization right now. Okay, so now before we move any further, let's look at the levels of organization within a living organism, just so we can understand the composition and like what parts generally are in an organism. Let's get into that. So first, let's look at my guest here. Let's name him Bob. Okay, it's not very accurate of a person, so we're gonna work with, and we know that he's a person, he's a living organism. Okay. And now, Bob, this living organism is composed of multiple organ systems, and for a person, it ranges from 11 to 12. Now, why is there no specific number to this? Why is it not like a set number? That's because it just depends on how it's classified. Some people might consider a certain organ part of a certain organ system, while others might like put it into a completely different system that's really specific. It could just depend, but the point is that a living organism is made of multiple of these organ systems, which are just like groups of organs that will work together to produce a function. Collectively, how they all interact to produce a bigger function, or like a more prominent function. Okay, now that brings us to organs, which is what these organ systems are made of. So organ systems are made of just a bunch of organs that are going to work together to do some things. So an organ is a specific like structure that does a specific function, but collectively will contribute to something larger, to a larger function that is considered in this organ system. That's considered like it's collectively. So when they work together like that, it's considered a function of the organ system. But when you're like referring to that singular organ, it's a specific function of that organ. And now, how does an organ get classified into an organ system? Good question. So it just depends on like what other organs like this organ works best with, or like, well, not works best with, but what organ it works to do this function. So just like, and no, an organ isn't like specifically like set to the system. It doesn't, in that it can't be with another organ system. Like a bunch of organs like play either a major role in a system, or might not play the biggest role, or could play a big role. It's just like what organs work together to do something, and that's what that organ system is known for, classified for. But that doesn't like set one organ to one system and not to another. But it just depends on how or what organs do this function, what organs contribute to this process. That's just how they're classified into a system. Sorry, that sounds confusing, but hopefully I made it clear-ish. But yeah, so an organ just functions to work towards something bigger. There's a specific function that will work towards something bigger. And now let me give you an example. So the muscular system is known for movement, but that requires the collaboration of multiple muscles, organs, to make that happen, to make that main function happen. So muscles are known as like the organs of the muscular system, because they will collectively work together to make movement possible. Now I'll speak to a more specific example. So like for instance, you want to move your forearm up to your arm, okay? The biceps brachii contracts, shortens. The triceps brachii relax, and the brachialis supports supports the biceps brachii in order to move your forearm up to your upper arm. If that's what it's called. I just call it arm, but like, so it's going to require, to do this motion, it requires the collaboration of multiple muscles to make this happen. Biceps brachii shorten, triceps relax, and brachialis supports the biceps brachii. Sorry, I was mixing up terms right there. But anyways, now let's move on to what makes an organ. So organs are made of tissues. And if we continue in this example, the tissue in this example would be a skeletal muscle tissue, because it allows voluntary movements. Like, you want to do it, so it's going to happen. It's not something that like you have to think. It is something you have to think about. It's not involuntary though. It's something you think about and you're doing it. So that's what a skeletal muscle essentially does. But I'm not going to talk about that right now. We'll get into that into another video. But essentially, muscles that you have to think about doing in order for it to happen, like that you have to think about doing a certain motion or in order for it to happen, those are skeletal muscles. So they are composed of specialized cells called muscle fibers that will carry out this function through the sliding filament model, my favorite topic ever. So they will carry out this function, and essentially tissues are just groups of these specialized cells that will all contribute to this bigger function that they're trying to do. Next, cells are composed of organelles. A lot of organelles. Sorry guys. Okay. So let me even look clear. Oh no. But it's composed of a lot of organelles. like the nucleus, the mitochondria. So those are the main ones. There's like ribosomes, rough endoplasmic reticulum, everything that is just going to make sure that the cell functions properly, does what it needs to do, and stays alive. I don't know if I was very clear, I'm sorry, but if you have any questions, let me know in the comments, and we're going to move into our next topic. Okay, so now that we understand how the body is organized, and I mean, you can, of course, break it down even further. Like, you can break it down from a cell to a cell having multiple organelles. Organelles are made of multiple molecules, and molecules are made of atoms. So you can of course break that down even further. But I just want you guys to get like a general understanding of what essentially makes up an organism. So I just want to give us a little bit of an understanding on that. But now we need to learn how to describe the position of the body, how to describe the structures within the body, like how to describe where they are in the body exactly. And that is where anatomical position will be very useful, because anatomical position is essentially this reference point to describing structures. And let me give you guys an example on how, like, if it didn't exist or you didn't know about it, how that'd be a bit of a problem. So let's say you're looking at the hand, okay? You're saying the thumb is on the outermost side of the hand, is the outermost finger of the hand, right? But someone else is going to say, no, the thumb is on the innermost side of the finger, or is the innermost finger. Who's right? You essentially are both right, because, I mean, it can be thought of in both ways. But you're both going to get confused because you guys are seeing it in different orientations. And that is where anatomical position and directional terms will be helpful, so you guys can see that same structure like in the same way. And so basically anatomical position is this. Your feet are together. You guys can't see my feet, but like my feet are together. Toes are facing forward. Your head is facing forward as well. Your eyes are open and you're standing up straight. And your hands are by your sides and your palms are facing forward. You guys can't really see it. I'm trying to like make sure you guys see, but essentially that. And make sure your feet are flat down. I've been like moving up and down, but your feet are flat down. So feet are flat down, together, and your toes are facing forward, head is facing forward, your eyes are open, hands by your sides, and palms are facing forward. And you're standing up straight. That is anatomical position. But now we're going to look at the different planes of the body that you can see it from, the different like ways to see it, I guess, because organs are just like all in like, they're all like kind of like, you can't like clearly see where one is or where another is. It's all just like, it's not together, but like it's very like difficult to like find an organ if you just were to see it like from this front side. You couldn't see organs in the back, you couldn't see organs like under one another, you couldn't see that if you look at it from one viewpoint at least. That's why the planes of the body are going to help us be able to like, if you were to see it from like one plane, like you can see some organs more clearly from one plane than you can from another plane, if that makes sense. So let's get into that. So the coronal plane, also known as the frontal plane, my drawing is not very good, I guess, because like I wasn't sure how to draw it. I wasn't really sure how to draw that, but like essentially it's dividing your, like, it's basically cutting this like from here, cutting from the top of your head down, so that your body is divided into a front portion and a back portion. Next is the sagittal plane, and that is dividing your body into left and right portions. Sorry, I was like, am I doing the right side or the left side? So essentially dividing your body into the left and the right sides. But that can be a little more specific with the mid-sagittal plane, which is like directly in the middle. You're dividing your body from the middle point to the left and right sides. Sagittal plane can be from like any point, as long as you're dividing it into a left and a right portion, but can be from any like point of the body. Mid-sagittal is very specific to the middle of the body. And next, and at least last but not least for the main ones, we have transverse plane, and that is dividing the body into top and bottom portions. Dividing it into like this horizontal line. I don't know if you guys can see it, but like that. Dividing like that. These are going downwards. This can go from here. I don't know if that's clear or not, but like, yeah. So transverse is dividing into that top and bottom portion. So that's a little bit for anatomical positions, and now let's get to the next part. So now when referring to certain structures, think about where you're looking at these structures, what viewpoint you're looking at them from this orientation and anatomical position, unless told otherwise. But now, to describe the placement or the direction of certain structures, we need to use directional terms. So let's get a little into that. So this may seem like a lot of terms, but they're like in sets, if that makes sense. There's like usually 2 terms within the set, and they're usually opposing terms. So it should be easy to understand. Once you know one, you can be like, oh, just the opposite of whatever that one is like. So let me kind of walk you through that. So let's first start with our first set, anterior and posterior. Anterior refers to like the front side of the body. And I mean, this is kind of a stretch, because the way I kind of like, I don't know, if I were to think of how you can think of this at the top of your head, how to remember like what that term is or how to refer to that, the front side of the body, if I were to think of like an easy way to remember that word, when you think of the word anterior, starts with an A, first letter of the alphabet, first, front, I don't know, it's just something I thought off the top of my head. But this next one for posterior makes a little more sense. So if you think of the prefix post, it refers to like something happening later or something that's behind, refers to your backside. So that's just some ways you can remember, but however like you can initially think of that word fitting with what it is, that's going to be like the best way to remember it for you. So just do what you prefer, but these are just some ideas to get you guys kind of thinking. And if you were to use these terms in a sentence, so you can say your chest is anterior to your spine, and that's essentially true. Your chest is like in front of your spine. I don't really like using the words like chest and things like that, because like they're not directly talking about specific structures. So I mean, it's kind of confusing, because it's like, what are you referring to as the chest or whatever? So I mean when we get to a later point, we can, use actual structure names. But I mean, just so you guys can get the general idea. I don't even know if that's supposed to be, I said it out loud. So yeah, let's move forward. So next set is superior and inferior. Superior and inferior. So when I think of the word superior, I think of something being like someone being above me, if that makes sense. So you think of something superior, you think it's like above you. Someone superior to you, then they like are above you in class or like rank or something. And that's essentially capturing the essence of what this word is or means. So superior refers to something that's on the more above side, and inferior is something below. So if you were to use this in a sentence, you can say your head is superior to your shoulders, because essentially your head is above your shoulders. Okay, these next terms might be a little more harder to like comprehend, but it's okay. I'll try to explain it as best I can. So the next set is medial and lateral. Medial sounds like middle. It's like, or at least like you can, when I think of medial, I think of middle, because it just like sounds very similar. And that's essentially capturing again the essence of what this word is. It's referring to something being closer to the midline of the body, the central line of the body. Something being closer. And then lateral is the opposite, something being farther away from the midline of the body. And an example is your thumb is lateral to your pinky. At anatomical position, so your thumb is lateral to your pinky. And that's true because your pinky is essentially closer to the midline of your body than your thumb is. So your thumb is therefore lateral to the pinky. And that's another point I want to bring up is when you're saying something in sentences, you can't just say your thumb is lateral or like your chest is anterior, because you have to compare it to something else, because it needs to be like your chest is anterior to what. So just make sure when you're like forming sentences or just saying things like that, you structure it correctly. You're comparing it to something else, because then you're like it's superior to what, because maybe like there's a structure that's more superior to the structure that you're referring to, but like they wouldn't exactly know what you're talking about. So you need to compare it to something else, compare it to another structure to make sense of it. So next set of terms is superficial and deep. When I think of someone or something being superficial, I think of it being like, or someone being like acting one certain way, like in front of others, but like being like different on the inside. And that kind of also captures what this word means. It's essentially referring to something that is closer to the surface of the body. And deep, when someone tells you go in depth of something, or to go into a deeper level of understanding, going farther away from the surface, going farther away from what's seen commonly. So, and the sentence you can say is like, your skin is superficial to your bones, because your skin is closer, or essentially is closer to the surface of the body than your bones are. Your bones are more deep, more deep to the skin. Or, sorry, I don't want to use the word more than that. Your bones are deep to your skin. Okay, so next, this set of terms is kind of a bit of an iffy one. It's a bit kind of hard to understand at first, but over time you guys will understand, so don't worry, you guys got this. But the set of terms is proximal and distal. So when you're saying something is proximal, you're saying that it's closer to the origin point. It's in closer proximity, proximal, closer proximity to the attachment point, closer proximity to the origin point. And distal is saying it's like a further distance from the origin point. And the thing about this set of terms is you can only use it referring to appendages, like your arms and your legs. So when you're referring to something being like, when you're referring to like a structure being more proximal than another one is, your like point that you're referring, like, you know how when we're saying medial and lateral, we're referring to the midline? What we're referring to for like upper appendages to consider something being proximal or distal to another structure, the shoulders. The shoulders are the upper appendage's most proximal point. And for the lower appendages, your hips are the most proximal point. So if I were to use this in a sentence, your knee is proximal to your ankle. You guys can't exactly see my knee, but this is true because your knee is in closer proximity to your hips than your ankle is. Because your ankle is like down here. So your knee is in closer proximity to your hips than your ankle is, therefore making your knee proximal to your ankle. So, I mean, these words won't come directly to you unless, like, if they do, that might be nice, because like anterior and posterior, superior and inferior may come a little more easily, but the other words might not. So, I mean, if you guys want me to put some like practice questions out there, let me know. But let's move forward to the next section of this video. But comment down below if you do want any like practice questions or anything. I might just post them anyways, just to get you guys a little more familiar. But also, if you guys have questions, feel free to comment down below. But anyways, I'm going to move to the next section now. Now, an important thing to note is anatomy and physiology is essentially a language. We can't just point to something and expect people to understand what we're talking about. We need a specific term for it, and that is where regional terms will come into play, which is essentially like a term for a region of the body. So just like any other language, once you learn a word, learning more complex words becomes easier because they contain like parts of a word you already know. So you know that this more complex word has something to do with this. And that's kind of like the same for anatomy and physiology. Now, funny story. So basically when I started like first learning anatomy and physiology, I started by learning like a lot of these like parts and structures, a lot more like complex structures and parts and all that, before I'd actually learned regional terms, which I only like learned like a few months ago. And it was super easy for me to like understand regional terms like after learning all these really hard things, because like I'll explain a little more about this like when we get to the regional terms part, but like, you know, they contain like similar root words and you can just tell like what region this is referring to based on like a bone that I'd learned. So it just makes it a lot easier to understand. But I feel like if I'd learned the regional terms first, learning like the bones and like other structures of the body would have been a lot easier. So that's why I'm just bringing this in first, so guys understand easier. And also when I talk about other structures in the future, I can just say what region of the body it's in and you'll understand what I'm talking about, instead of just like pointing somewhere that you don't know. So now let's move into these regional terms. There's so many, so bear with me here. First, I wrote them all up here. I don't think you guys can see it, can you? I think you guys can see it, like decently. So first we have the abdominal region. This is essentially the region where your abs are. Don't think about it as the way or as the place where your stomach is, because your stomach is actually a very small organ and it's like only in a certain like part of the abdominal region. So it doesn't really resemble that whole entire area. So I'll just describe it as the place where your abs are. Next is the antecubital region. So anti means like anterior. So it's like at the anterior part of your body, right? And then cubital or cubitus is like a root word that is a word is a root word for elbow. So it's at the front part of your elbow, or you can also think about it as the place where blood is drawn on your arm. So like right here. Next is the brachial region. And this is essentially the area from the shoulder to the elbow. So like where your triceps brachii muscle is, your biceps brachii muscle, in this area. So from here, or from your shoulder to like your elbow. Next is the buccal region. This is where your cheeks are. And then next is the calcaneal region. That is essentially just where your heel is of your foot. I can't really like show you guys if I try to, but like it's just the heel part of your foot. Next is the carpal region, which is your wrist. And next is the cephalic region, which is just your whole head. And next is the cervical region, which is like your neck area, or where your cervical vertebrae are, which I will talk about more in the future. And next is the coxal region, which is like your hips, your hip bones. And like the reason why, or like the way you kind of like can remember this, I guess, is your hip bones or your pelvic bones are called os coxae. I don't know if I'm saying that right. Os coxae. So they're called that. So coxal, os coxae. Similar words. So yeah, that's just what the hip bones or pelvic bones, you can just say hip or pelvic bones. Pelvic is probably a lot more specific, but that's essentially like their scientific name. So that's why that's just like a good way to remember that it's coxal region, knowing the scientific name for it. Next is digital region, which is like your fingers and your toes. And a nice way to remember this is like, you know, you type with your fingers on a digital device, so like digital. So that's the digital region. Next is the femoral region, which is your thigh or your femur. Next is the gluteal region, which is your butt region. Next is the inguinal region, which is your groin area, like up here. Down like here, like your groin area. Next is the lumbar region, which is the lower back, where your lumbar vertebrae are. Next is the nasal region, as it kind of says in the name, like your nose area. Next is the occipital region, which is essentially where your occipital lobe of your brain is, which is the back of your head. Next is the oral region, which is where your mouth is, you know, how you speak. I mean, like a good way to remember that is like, you know, people say like oral speech. So like, you know, your mouth area. And next is orbital region. That's your eyes. Next is the patellar region, which are your kneecaps, which are known as patella, which are like, that's the bone. It's the patella. Next is the pelvic region, which is your pelvis and the sacrum and coccyx, which are just like the lower ends of your spine. Now, this is a bit confusing because the hip bones are the pelvic bones. So like, what's the difference between the coxal region and the pelvic region? And it's essentially that the pelvic region is just like that whole area in general. But then the coxal region is more specifically referring to your sides. It's just more specific to like the side, to your hip bones, to the sides. But the pelvic region is just like, in general, that area with the pelvic bones, the sacrum, the coccyx, just that like general region. I was gonna say sacral, but I was like, the grammar there. But anyways, next we have the popliteal region, which is the back of the knee. Next is the sacral region, which is again like that end of the spine, just a more specific like area. The pelvic region is just a little more general, but if you want to refer to something more specific, you would say sacral region. It's like that. The coccyx is on the bottom, but then the sacrum's like up, like the second lowest part of the spine. And next is the scapular region, which is your shoulder blade. And then next is the sternal region, which is where your breastbone or your sternum is. And sorry, that's like longer actually. And then there's the tarsal region, which is your ankle. Next is the thoracic region, which is like your chest region essentially. But I mean, if you want to think of it from the back, the thoracic vertebrae area, or like where your lungs are area. Next is the umbilical region, which is like your belly button area, because like that's where like the umbilical cord is, like on the inside of your body. And then next is the vertebral region, which is just like the whole spine. And that is pretty much it for all of those terms. So there's so many. I just went through them really fast. But if you want any more clarification on that, we can go more into that in future videos as well, and it'll make a lot more sense in the future as well. Wow, those were so many terms. But now that we know these terms, they will be a lifesaver when we talk, especially about the bones of the body, because a lot of bones of the body, like their names are kind of derived from the regional name. So it's definitely going to be, like a lot of those bone names are derived from that regional name. So it's going to be definitely very helpful when we get to that part of our videos. And also, like when I talk about certain structures of the body, I can just simply say like, it's in this region, it's in the brachial region, and you'll understand it better than if I were to say, oh, it's in this region of the body, because like, that's not really specific. So don't worry, knowing these terms will definitely pay off in the future. But now that we know the basics of anatomy and physiology, we are really set to go into the world of anatomy and physiology. So stay tuned for future videos. And if you guys have any questions regarding anything I talked about in this video, or anything in the future you guys want to see, any comments, questions, anything, feel free to comment them in the comments down below. And I can't wait to see you guys in the next videos. Bye, stay tuned.